It's 1973. The Vietnam War has just ended, and soldiers are returning to Oceana Air Base in Virginia Beach. 27-year-old Bob Clusterman is one of the lucky men to make it home alive.
Bob was a pilot. He had just come out of Vietnam. He had been flying helicopters. He survived it. That was a big accomplishment where a lot of his friends didn't.
Becky Cofield is a 21-year-old local girl with a job at the base. She meets Bob after work at a bar.
I think it was called The Shack or one of the oceanfront clubs. And she met him there. She was out with some friends and he was out with friends. And that's how she met him here in Virginia Beach. He was nice, he was quiet, he had good credentials and he had a great car. He had a white Corvette, and most pilots, it was kind of a typical thing, they usually had nice cars.
Becky's personality and good looks catch his eye.
She was very outgoing. When she walks in a room, you know it, because she's smiling and happy and very outgoing and makes you feel good.
Bob is not like the other guys Becky knows. She's a single mom, and she's looking for someone serious.
He came in uniform every time, which stood out in Virginia Beach, in the foosball parlors, in the places where teenagers hang out. You just didn't show up that way. She didn't care. He didn't care.
He was very smart, and so with those things, it kind of helped, her say, hey, this is a good guy, and this is the kind of guy I like to, spend my life with.
About a year after they meet, the Navy sends Bob to Mississippi to be a flight instructor, and Becky tags along.
I remember Becky saying, well, how are we going to get to Mississippi in this car? It's a two-seater, and we have a child. So his remedy was to put a luggage rack on the back of the Corvette.
Things get serious very quickly.
He called me and said, Mary Ann, I met somebody and I want to get married. I said, oh, that's good, Bob. Are you going to come home for the wedding, No, we're just going to get married down here.
They looked like a power couple. She looked happy to be on his arm, and he looked mighty happy for her to be there.
Bob adopts Becky's son, Todd, too. Next, the new family is sent to Jacksonville, Florida, where Bob trains as a jet fighter pilot.
They lived in a town called Orange Park. They had a nice little ranch house on the back of a cul-de-sac, and it was south of town.
Becky settles into the role of housewife.
He went to work, he came home, she made him the meals. It was just typical. She watched TV during the day when Todd was at school.
And Bob connects with friends.
I always felt welcome at their home, whether Becky was there by herself, whether I brought a bag of donuts in or not, I felt welcome.
And Becky throws herself into the role of Navy wife.
As soon as you marry into the Navy, you become a Navy wife. And Becky took to that quickly. She was always happy to be at Navy functions and parties and social events.
Becky makes friends with the other Navy wives, too.
When you had a problem as a Navy wife, there was nobody to call. All you had were the friendships you made with these other women, and they took care of each other.
Bob advances steadily in his career, serving tours overseas as a junior officer, a department head, and an instructor pilot.
His goal was to be the best, and if there's a rank to come up and it's an opening, he wanted to be the guy to get it.
As Bob's rank increases, Becky learns to navigate the subtle politics of Navy functions.
Most of the military men knew how to use their social contacts to further their career. Bob didn't do that very well. Becky didn't mind doing that. She would find out all the information he needed, and then he would go put it in use.
As Bob's rank increases, Becky learns to navigate the subtle politics of Navy functions.
Most of the military men knew how to use their social contacts to further their career. Bob didn't do that very well. Becky didn't mind doing that. She would find out all the information he needed, and then he would go put it in use.
Psychotherapist Stacy Kaiser and forensic psychologist Brian Russell have seen this dynamic in military couples before.
At the beginning, I think Bob was just exactly what Becky was probably looking for, and Becky was probably just exactly what Bob was looking for.
But Bob's constant deployments take their toll, and after only 2 years of marriage, they start to drift apart. Bob wishes Becky would contact him more when he's out at sea. He writes to her, and she never replies.
In those letters, he would beg her to write to him and go ashore, and several guys would get 7 or 8 letters, and he would get none. Then he would say, "I love you," and there was a silence.
His whole life is focused on his career and moving up in the ranks, and that she feels neglected, and so that this is her way of trying to make an impact.
Bob seems like a guy to whom appearances are important, and I wonder whether Bob may not have also been concerned about the way that it looked when his fellow officers were receiving more letters from home and he was receiving so few.
As much as he wants her attention while away, when Bob is back on leave, Becky often finds him distant and in a bad mood.
You would think it would be a wonderful homecoming. Hey, how you doing, whatever. Well, he had been on the base for a couple of hours. He just hadn't come home. And when he did, he would do this snorting sound. And then he would say, "Hey," and then go to the bedroom.
His behavior, coupled with his long absences, leave an uneasy feeling in the household.
Becky was a little tense around Bob. She was to not only take care of the house and the child, but it had to be on his schedule.
Todd would run for the hills. He would go to his room, he would avoid the situation, and then Becky would, deal with a grumpy husband.
So if he didn't tell her what time he wanted his dinner and she didn't have it ready, his expectation was, you're going to keep it warm, just like the galley keeps it warm for all the sailors.
Becky also notices Bob is drinking a lot, and it worries her.
I was having a lot of conversations with Becky about Bob's behavior. She didn't understand why he had this urge, this need to drink heavily.
She suspects Bob's drinking and bad moods are linked to his wartime experiences. He flew 440 combat missions in Vietnam.
They didn't have a term like they do now, post-traumatic stress, but she felt that's what the problem was. She couldn't imagine a man saying, "I love you," and then being rude or impatient. In her mind, that did not connect. So either there was something that had broken in the war, or she didn't know this man, and she tended to go to, he was broken.
I wouldn't say that Bob has a full-blown post-traumatic stress disorder, because I would be looking for things like nightmares and flashbacks, which I'm not seeing. But what I am seeing is this agitation, this tendency towards depression, and it could have something to do with experiences that he had during the war.
Becky is angry that he can't control his drinking and is risking his career and his home life.
She was so mad at him for jeopardizing what he wanted out of life for something stupid as to one last drink.
And after 4 years, she even considers ending their marriage.
And I think at that point she was ready to leave him.
But Becky has secrets of her own. Their relationship is in tatters when Becky gets some unexpected news.
Bob was out to sea, and she realized within the first few weeks she was pregnant.
But for Becky, it's not good news.
The doctors had told her before not to go forward with any pregnancy, that they couldn't guarantee that either one, she or the child, would come out okay.
Becky doesn't tell Bob she's pregnant. According to Kitty, Becky suffers from hyperthyroidism, a hormonal imbalance that can lead to heart failure for the mother and birth defects for the baby. A few days later, she terminates the pregnancy. She keeps this a secret from Bob, too.
I've got to believe that in a healthy marriage, if a person was happy with their spouse, they would have come to them immediately and said, "You know, I have medical issues and I cannot have these children."
Bob returns from his deployment, and things are as strained as ever. One evening, the couple is arguing over Todd's homework when Becky drops a bombshell.
She picked it that night to tell him about the pregnancy and the abortion at the same time. She was far enough along for them to know that it was twins, apparently.
Keeping a secret can give somebody a sense of being empowered. And I think that that is at play in this particular case, because you can see that she chose to bring that out at just the precise time when she was engaged in a conflict with Bob and she needed or felt the need to exert some power over him.
Bob is devastated.
To pop both those things on him with very little prep was difficult, and I don't think he really could ever get over that. He always wanted children.
Bob is never home, and Becky finds herself alone again after all those years of being a Navy wife.
I would hang out at their home and chat with Becky, and lots of times Bob wasn't home.
He was busy and traveling for the company that he was working for, and he wouldn't tell her where he was going. He would just, I've got to go.
Sometimes he'd surprise me, walk up to me. I'm working at the ballpark at the Reds game, turn around, there's Bob standing there. He's got a ticket for the game that came into town.
Becky begins to suspect Bob of having an affair.
Becky knew that Bob cheated on her from the early days in their marriage, but she turned a blind eye when it happened overseas.
But she finds it harder to ignore so close to home.
I think Bob misplaced either his credit card or his wallet or his telephone. But she gets a phone call from this place called Camelot.
The Camelot Show Bar is not just any old night spot. It's a strip club in Washington, D.C.
Well, he wasn't supposed to be in the D.C. area. And so she asked him, Bob, you're missing your phone?
He said, oh, I dropped that running, and I must have been running past them, and they found the phone, and that's how it ended up, them calling me.
After Becky confronts him, Bob heads to D.C. to pick it up. Despite his denial, deep down, Becky knows he's lying. She just doesn't know to what extent. Soon, the tension between the couple comes to a head.
He was shopping in the ladies' department, and he had spent hundreds of dollars each time, and it wasn't for her.
Becky is thunderstruck. Not only does it look like Bob is having an affair, he is spending a lot of money. And the ultimate insult, he's been asking her for months to cut back on expenses.
He was telling her that money was tight, that they needed to save for his retirement and for the possibility that this job wouldn't last.
Bob was the breadwinner, but he did the finances the majority of the time, so she never really saw the bills. She just saw the results.
And all the while, Bob discourages Becky from getting a job.
When he was gone, she would work, and when he would come back, he made her quit because she wasn't there to fix him dinner and do all the things that needed to do. Didn't cut the grass, didn't clean the house.
Becky waits before asking Bob about the purchases.
Until Becky had concrete evidence of anything, she knew better than to just blast off and say, you've done this or that.
Then the final straw. In November of 2008, she finds a letter from the bank, and it's a shock. Their home has been stripped of all its equity.
It should have been probably almost paid for, or maybe completely paid for, knowing the income that he made in his career. It wasn't. All of this money was missing.
With concrete proof in hand, Becky finally confronts Bob.
They're arguing about finances and about where he's spending the money. And she said they got into a pretty darn good argument, a loud one, and she wasn't going to back down.
Always do it for you.
And he pulled a gun out of the desk drawer.
Becky remembers Bob pointing the gun at her, then at himself, and saying, "You'll never see any money." While Bob claims he never pointed the gun at Becky.
Bob said he waved the gun at himself and asked Becky if she would like for him to kill himself. Then Bob said Becky spat back at him, "You don't have the guts."
Her sister imagines Bob's version is closer to the truth.
I'm pretty sure she egged him on. She probably said, "You don't have the balls." And I'm pretty sure she cleaned it up for the deposition.
In the end, the facts don't matter. The truth is, Bob pulled a gun during an argument with his wife.
He had been able to talk her out of filing for divorce, I imagine, several times before. He couldn't do it this time. Waving the gun at her changed that.
The next day, Becky starts divorce proceedings. She also files a protective order against Bob and asks the court to revoke his gun permit.
And then all of a sudden, here come the police, and they extricate him from the house. Say, you have to leave, over the gun charge.
Bob checks into a hotel that night and eventually finds his own apartment. With her husband gone, Becky combs the house for more evidence of his erratic behavior. And she finds it.
She didn't know that he was buying guns. They came in boxes she wasn't allowed to open. These guns would end up in a closet that was locked.
Bob Clusterman pulls out a gun during an argument with wife Becky over their finances. She files for divorce and discovers that he's been leading a double life. After 35 years, their marriage is about to end.
Bob and Becky had agreed on a settlement for the divorce, and within days, they were going to be at the courthouse and settle once and for all.
The protection order against Bob is lifted, and despite their differences, Bob and Becky continue to see each other after they file for divorce.
They were going to counseling because that's part of the rules of the road and the divorce proceeding here.
Sometimes they even sleep together.
And they continue to have a very intimate relationship, even through the divorce.
I think Becky and Bob continue to see each other because they do have a connection. They were in love once, and so I think that's part of what keeps luring them back to one another.
Over time, people come to fill roles in each other's lives that feel like huge voids when they leave, even if they were also causing a lot of pain and heartache and damage.
Bob feels comfortable enough to drop by unannounced, and neighbors often see them together. Sometimes they talk, often they argue.
A neighbor quietly let people know that they had seen things go on and arguments and things like that.
But now that the divorce proceedings are nearly over, Becky doesn't want to see Bob anymore. He seems more erratic as they approach the finish line.
I was helping her to move things. He didn't know I was in the house. And he came in, and his expression was one of pure anger. And he caught me out of the corner of his eye, and it changed like a mask.
The court also reinstates Bob's gun permit, and Becky is scared.
Becky was a nervous wreck that last year. She went down to 92, 95 pounds. She couldn't sit still. She couldn't sleep.
To his own family, Bob seems frustrated, but he's coping.
He was venting. Yeah, I'd say, oh, yeah, Bob, you know, you're going to laugh about this in a couple years, you know. So that's why I thought he was okay.
But as the realities of the divorce sink in, Bob becomes angrier.
The house would have been sold, period. There would have been no question. And other properties he may have owned or rented had to have ended. The lifestyle was going away, in other words.
The former couple had also racked up hundreds of thousands of dollars in legal fees.
Bob felt that the attorneys involved were bleeding them dry. Even if Bob had a decent income from his contracting job and his retirement, a lot of it was going to have to go to paying legal fees.
To Bob, it seems like he has nothing left.
He thought that he was not going to, everything was going to be going to Becky, that he was not going to have anything to live on even.
For the man to whom honor and status mean everything, Bob is completely ruined.
When he gets that decree and he realizes it's over, he's going to end up paying all this, and he's going to end up having to have nothing left, and probably nothing left of his reputation, even in the workplace.
On the Sunday before the Clustermans are to sign their final divorce papers, neighbors see Bob again.
Bob parked around the corner, walked in the neighborhood up to the house. They saw him. They waved hi, but nobody called police.
Becky notices Bob too.
She had written Bob was in the backyard at 6:30 a.m., where she was kind of making notes of, you know, anything suspicious.
She goes for a drive to avoid him.
She'd gone out thinking that he'd be gone, you know, been drawn off by the fact she was no longer in the house, and then she came back again, and he followed her into the house.
I did hear there were bruise marks on her arm in the shape of a handprint. So I think that he kind of manhandled her into that garage and forced her to lay down.
As it's told, she pulled out some of the moving boxes, and he shot her on the moving box because she didn't want to make a mess, because she didn't want us to have to clean it up.
No one hears a thing.
He needed some kind of fortification, and he hit the liquor cabinet, put the dogs out back, and walked back to where his car was.
Leading up to the killing, Bob had drafted a half-dozen or so letters to family and friends. He mails them before he carries out his final plan.
The police thought that he had dropped them in the mailbox that morning, and he drove the car up, locked it, and went into the house and finished.
About a half hour after he kills Becky, Bob dials 911.
He called the police, saying that he had done something to his wife and that they needed to come right away. And he did the same with himself, laid down on a piece of cardboard with both of their driver's license placed, right on top of their bodies, was the way that he did it. So there would be no mistaking who they were, and that's the way that they were found.
He shoots himself the same way he shot Becky, with a handgun in the chest.
And I keep patting myself in the head thinking, why didn't you see a sign? You should have saw something.
Never had an inkling that was going to happen.
A few days later, Bob's suicide letters start arriving by mail.
It looks to me like Bob had decided that there was nothing left to live for and that he was going to leave the world with an explanation of how wronged he felt he had been, and he was going to take with him the person that he externalized the blame for all of that onto, Becky.
I think Bob held a lot of feelings in and a lot of thoughts during his life. And so before he decided to commit the murder-suicide, he felt that it was important to get his story told. He wanted explanations, he wanted specifics, and he also wanted to place blame. He wanted it on the record that he thought that Becky was responsible.
In them, he blames Becky for most of the things that went wrong in his life. Bob tells everyone again how Becky cost him his future in the Navy.
The tailhook scandal changed the course of his life, took him off track. And for someone who needed that structure and that sense of place, Bob lost that.
Bob also says Becky's decision to abort their twins is akin to murder.
He still was angry that his unborn children were murdered. Come on now, that was how many years ago? 30 years ago, and you're gonna harp on that? If that was the critical point, why didn't it end then?
Becky had also convinced him to leave a job he enjoyed to work for her cousin.
The whole time he was regretting leaving Newport News Shipbuilding. That was where he was happy. It's where he was working with people he had been in aviation with over the years.
Finally, Becky's decision to pursue the divorce stripped them of nearly everything.
He was very bitter about the legal fees. By Bob's reckoning, it cost $150,000. Bob felt that Becky could have made the divorce much easier, but she insisted on fighting it.
Bob lists countless reasons why Becky was accountable for his failures, but they could never justify his actions. Could it have been caused by repressed emotions from his combat days?
After the war in Vietnam, would there be some issues there? I would think yes. Now, do I think they manifested themselves from the 60s all the way to 2010 and caused him to do what he did? No. I think there's so many other layers to this story that got him to where he ended up.
This was too well scripted. He had practiced letters on his desk from the time of the divorce proceedings in court all the way up to May 2nd. He knew what he was doing, and he didn't stop himself.
Bob went to such great lengths in that suicide letter to illustrate why everybody but him was to blame for his troubles. I really think as a psychologist reading that letter, it suggests to me some denial, some active attempt to not think about all of the ways that his own character and decisions played into his outcomes in life.
Part of what a person wants to feel later in life is satisfaction. They want to be able to look back and say, I'm happy with the way my life went. And I don't think Bob could look back and say he was happy about anything.
When the policeman called, he said that, a lot of times Your brother was high in the Navy. He had control over thousands of people. The divorce was getting out of control. And when people are in a high position and they do make all these big decisions, that when it's taken out of their hands, they snap.
I think he saw that as the only end for the two of them. In his head, you can see that from reading the letter, that's what he saw as the only outcome because they were ruined.
And if he couldn't move on, neither would Becky.
She was going to pick up the pieces of her life, and she was going to move on, and she was going to have a good life. She was fun, she was energetic, she was nice. He was dull, bitter, mean, and now broke. So he had nothing to lose. So he wasn't just going to be miserable by himself.